What if you were able to sit down for lunch with some of the greatest leaders in the world? What would you ask? What would they say? Welcome to the Linch with a Leader podcast, where you're invited to join us in learning the spiritual principles behind big success. Here's your host, Mike Lynch.
The great leader Craig Groeschel said this: growth creates complexity, and complexity kills growth. Therein lies the toughness of being a leader, and that's what we're going to talk about today on Linch with a Leader. If I've never met you before, my name is Mike, and it is an honor to welcome you in on this leadership journey as we're all seeking to be the leaders that we were created to be in the spaces and places that God has put us. Well, I am so glad you've joined me for episode 232. We get to sit down with a great friend, a multi-time guest, Dan Reiland, to talk about the leadership and the strategies and the hurdles that we go to in leadership development as we're all trying to do what we do, right? And there's mistakes that we make along the way that we just didn't see coming. Well, today we're going to talk about 6 of those leadership mistakes, and I think hopefully they can help you not make them moving forward. Well, Dan is a guy who's been in the business a long time. He's an author. He is a leader of leaders, most importantly, and he's been a practitioner for years. So what we're going to talk about today has teeth to it. What we're going to talk about today isn't out of a classroom and theoretical. It is out of actual real life, as Dan has led one of the greatest churches in America at 12 Stone as the executive pastor. And now he's in a brand new chapter, brand new season of doing some coaching and leading, and he's just a special man. So today's going to be one. No matter where you lead, if you're a principal, if you're a business leader, if you're a pastor, you're a coach, there is something in this for you. So I don't know where you're listening from today, but I want you to do me a favor, and I want you to pull up a chair, and I want you to listen in to my conversation on episode 232 with Dan Reiland. Well, Dan Reiland, you're one of my favorite people. Thanks again for joining me on this episode of Linch with a Leader. It's an honor to have you.
Mike, it's my pleasure. You know, I always love hang time with you, whether it's at your church or somewhere else or on Zoom calls here, but I appreciate the opportunity, and I'm looking forward to our conversation.
I love it. What I love about you is the breadth of leadership that you have seen throughout these years. What have you learned most from your early years starting in leadership to where you are today, where now you're entering a whole new season of leadership in your life and working with leaders? What's the biggest thing you've learned through the years that has changed about you?
Oh my, a couple of things come to mind, really. I think the theme would be change, and the amount of change I've seen in ministry in 40 years is mind-boggling. And the things that we had to, rather than going back, let me go forward to the future. I think the thing that I see now for young leaders that is radically different, that I'm still learning, that's radically different than when I started back in the Jurassic era, is I think the number one thing for a young leader today is the ability to interpret culture. We all understand if we're not relevant, if we don't get culture, we can't minister, we can't communicate the gospel. If we don't use words that people even understand, then they don't know what we're saying. And change has always been a truth about life, obviously. Culture is changing so fast, and it's so different, and it's so difficult to get your hands around all that's happening. If our young leaders don't know how to interpret what's happening and keep up with it, it'll be very difficult to lead.
How have you learned to do that? How have you learned, because you set out with a style, with a brand, with a compass going a direction, and you've had to interpret a lot of changes in culture through the years. What are some tips that you've gained that you could share today to help you do that better and more effectively?
I think my number one thing for this, Mike, is I hang around young people because no matter how much we read or study or try to stay up with things, we're bent to do what we've always known. We really do know more than what we think. We try to solve new problems with old solutions because it's just our wiring. It's who we are. And when we're under pressure, we don't take the time to think about what does the real solution need to be. We just go to what we know worked in the past, but it really doesn't work. So for me, the solution has been, well, one of them for me is I hang around young people. We have a residency, 30 young students right out of college. We have a very young staff. My kids are young. I have grandkids, And so I literally, what music do they listen to? What TV do they watch? I mean, it's not what I grew up. I love the Beatles, right? They go, the beat, the what? So hanging around young people helps me. I try to look at culture through their eyes and how they interpret, even, we won't go here, Mike, but even politics, it's just how they see it helps me see culture in a more relevant way.
And it is so easy as we get older, as leaders, for us to feel our way is the right way and they're wrong. And therein, we become very stuck in where we are and we let things pass us by. We see it in the church world all the time. In the business world, it's no different, is it? It's sort of a crazy deal. So you got listeners, Dan, on this call that are in small startup organizations. They're in very early infancy, incubator years of doing life and leadership. What would you tell them they need to prepare for as they set sail with this organization that's going to change for them when the organization goes from smaller, where we're going to spend our time today, to being larger? What are some things they need to know that you've learned through the years about that change that they're about to experience?
Yeah, I think their whole picture of life and leadership changes from, I think in the early days of a young organization, whether it's a business or a church or a nonprofit, one of the first things that happens is you have to transition from leading by sight to leading through layers. And that's a very complex thing to do. Leading by sight means, if in the church world or even in business, you look around. I'll use the church world for a moment, but say on a Sunday morning, you look around and you know who's new and you know who's not. You know who's missing. You know who's not. You know who the troublemakers are and who's not. But after a while, you have to have the confidence that you can lead through other people. Or I have a young friend who started a landscaping business. He was really, really good at it. He's got the mower, he's got a buddy, they go do their thing. And the moment he started adding other lawn mowers and he was doing the scheduling, everything just came off the rails. And so he just had to learn to add structure and how to scale and how to move things forward. And that's where things get tricky, because now you're adding strategy to the vision. The vision is easy. I want to make this much money and mow lawns. I want to make people's yards look nice. Well, now when you add strategy to that and the complexity of structure and all that, things start changing really fast, and you start making mistakes as you get bigger that you wouldn't have made when it was small.
That's really, you in an article that you wrote, you quoted Craig Rochelle, and he said, growth creates complexity and complexity kills growth. That is so true. How have you watched, as you've literally watched an organization go from a smaller organization to now a massive organization? How have you watched through the years that complexity fight growth? How have you seen that happen in the front row seat that you've had?
The bigger it gets and the older, there's two factors. The bigger an organization gets and the older it gets, the more its constituency demands its own way. They want it to become more about them and serve me and do this. I get that. We want to serve the people well. But then everybody has their own idea. Everybody wants to do it kind of their way. And I think, maybe I speak for myself, but I think I speak for a lot of leaders, it's so much easier to say yes than it is to say no. And if we don't make the smart choices and say a lot of no's, we'll never get to the right yes. we have to just fight to keep it simple. Simplicity is essential, but that doesn't mean, here's part of the complexity of it. Keeping it simple doesn't mean we get to sacrifice depth and strength. The organization still has to be deep and strong. It just means we have to keep it simple, and that means learning how to say no. And making those smart choices helps us avoid the major mistakes that are related to strategy.
Why are we afraid of simplicity? Why are we as leaders afraid for the organization to seem simple? What is it? What's going on in our craniums that's going, hey, you got to make this complicated. This has to be like, it's got to be really difficult. What's going on upstairs in the leader's head that keeps them from simplicity?
That's a really, really insightful question. I don't know that I know what keeps them from it, except that it's easier to go complex than it is simple. It's counterintuitive, I know, but it's just easier to go complex. As a matter of fact, it's actually easier to allow it to become more complex because people want to do their own way. It goes back to what we already started talking about. It's easier to say yes than no. But let me give a couple of thoughts on, in the church world, the church naturally just becomes busy, not productive. And that's good people doing good things. And it's just you're doing more and more and more and more, and you get busier and busier and busier and busier. And it's just not productive. Just like in a business, you add a product and you're doing busier and you're doing more because you don't want to miss out. You want to keep expanding, you keep growing. But what happens is you actually simply get more exhausted. And here's the thing you got to watch for. And the machine takes over the mission.
Wow.
And that is the critical error, I think, in a business or in a church or in anything. Of course, my world is the church, but the machine is the everyday and the people and call this and do that and answer this thing and go over here and all the busyness that actually takes you off of why you started the church. Because the reason people start companies and churches and the things they do is usually a pretty simple, narrow, focused thing they do. It's a simple, narrow, focused problem they're trying to solve in the world or a way to help people. And we start doing all these other things and it distracts us. Kevin Myers, our founding senior pastor, once said something, there was a brilliant statement. He said, Dan, if we do everything at 12 Stone that everybody wants us to do, we'll no longer be the church they love and they'll leave. That's a great statement.
It's a great statement.
If we say yes to everything, we won't even be the church that they fell in love with because we'll just be busy, 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 busy.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I go back to my early years. It was so funny. So I when we started North Star, I was 28. I came alongside Ike, who is our founding pastor, and I thought being the key word, that I was ready to lead at 28. I really did. I felt like I had all the gas in the engine. I felt like I had all the dreams, all the visions. And what I was not ready for was the ability to say no. I wanted to say yes to everybody. And I mean, literally, I told this to a crowd the other week, if I had been in charge then, we'd be wearing choir robes and we would have small groups and Sunday school and Awana and RAs. And I would have done everything. And I remember Ike going, no, we're not going to do that, Mike. That's not what God called us to. And he had learned, you've got to do everything you can to not make this thing more complex than it really is. And so that was a profound, and all of this, and I want to give a plug here real quick. All of this is out of an article on your website, and you blog all the time about life and leadership, and it is so good. In this article on 6 major mistakes of leadership development, the guts of this are so practical. You not only talked about simplicity, but you talk about that we begin to drive major decisions without alignment. All right, unpack that. As a leader is leading, how do they find themselves driving a decision without getting everybody in tow on that decision?
Well, you can make a decision. Well, I think the outcome of that is when we make decisions that don't have alignment, you're not all going in the same direction.
Yeah. Yeah.
And when you're not going in the same direction, you're wasting massive amounts of energy and resources and just all the things that it takes to move forward. And so I think the way to talk about it maybe is to flip it back and say, how do we get how do we get alignment? I mean, that's very, very difficult because you want people on the team that they have opinions and they're strong and they have ideas. You don't just want people who do whatever you say all the time. And so you can really derail. Actually, this thought comes to mind. I'm like, that's how organizations get stuck. That's what gets us stuck, is when you drive decisions, you do what you want to do, but the team isn't aligned, whether it's a culture issue or whatever it might be, they're not aligned. But there's a couple things that are important here, though. Alignment doesn't always mean agreement. It doesn't always mean it. But it does mean a kind of a locking of arms, a locking of heart. We're in it together. We might not agree on everything, but we're all in it. When we leave the boardroom, when we leave the meeting, we're all in. We're going for it. And an alignment. This is a really big deal in the church. You can comment about maybe business and other teams, but alignment doesn't always include approval. You can't put everything to a vote. You won't go anywhere. You won't move. You won't. And so not everybody can be in every room. And that's a common problem as an organization grows. People start feeling left out. And, well, how come I'm not in the room anymore? How come I'm not at the table anymore? How come I'm not at that meeting anymore? Well, there'd be 27 people in the room.
Yeah.
And you're not going to go anywhere. And so alignment starts to look different where, like, remember I mentioned leading through layers? There may be a smaller room making the decision, but they've learned how to lead through layers because there's trust in the culture and they communicate really well. They're getting input. But here's one of the thoughts I love on getting alignment. It's not rank that should win on the ideas, the decisions that are made, where are we going, the direction we're going. It's not rank that should win. It's the best plans that should win. And one of the things we love to do, even on executive team meetings, is we don't meet by organizational status. We meet by agenda. And so there is a lead team that will invite in, they will invite in at any time anybody in the organization who speaks to the issue on the agenda, rather than just having a very small group do all the thinking and all the decision making. It's exposed to layers and layers and layers in the organization because the conversation's driven by agenda and who can help, not by rank on an org chart.
How did you handle it? Because you sat in the second seat. You sat in the you really were the implementer of the vision seat. What would happen on times when you and Pastor Kevin were not on the same page? There wasn't even alignment at the top. How did you guys navigate that before leaving the room or before leading a meeting with your other leaders? How did you guys learn to navigate that?
One of the principles that Kevin put in the water, so to speak, of our culture is MVS, mutual voluntary submission. And we practiced that honestly quite well over decades now. And MVS, mutual voluntary submission, here's what it looks like. Kevin has clearly been my boss all these years. He could tell me what to do. I report to him, et cetera, et cetera. But in 23 years now, he's never treated me that way for a moment. We're more partners. Now, he can, but we're more partners. He respects what I think. I respect what he thinks. So what we've done with that is we've also, secondary, but next to MVS, is we've learned where each of us are strong and where each of us lean and how each of us thinks. So let me give a practical example. When it comes to finances, I'm much more conservative. He would be bet the farm, push all the chips back in, and here we go. I'm going, and so here's what we know where we're making huge, huge financial decisions. His opinion is probably a little over the line. My opinion is probably a little under the line. And because of the MVS, we don't need to win. We need to move to the right decision by knowing how each of us are wired. And that has saved us a lot. Those two things have saved us a lot of heartache.
That is gold, because so many times you don't really even know how to navigate the room of leaders who are navigating the decisions. Did you find and this is probably more selfish than anything, did you find yourself you guys meeting about things even before they even went to the lead team and others, where you guys would create an alignment almost with each other before ever even walking in the room and sharing that?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. What was our job? We needed to. And it wasn't, it kind of, it tiered down all the way. Like the way that we would do vision is he would meet with God before he would talk with me or the board or the lead team, right? But the way he would do it, he didn't come in and say, "Thus saith the Lord, we're doing this." He would come in and say, "I prayed. This is what I think God has said." Maybe, in business, it might be the board of directors. I don't know. "I prayed. This is what I believe God has said." But then he would always ask two questions, always two things. "Guys, does this resonate with you? Does this sound like the Lord?" And then two, "If it does, help me make it better."
Boy, that's
Meaning,
good.
of course, if it didn't, then back to the drawing board a little bit. So there was always that MVS, that, mutual voluntary submission. But coming into a room with a blank piece of paper where we haven't talked, we don't even know where we're going, we don't even know what we're thinking, in my opinion, that's a waste of time.
Yep.
So coming in with something that the room can work with, I think is a really good idea. And it's really smart if, whether it's 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 people, in our case, it was 2, the one illustration you're using, we've done some homework.
Yeah,
we've done
that's
some
right.
homework. Yeah.
That's really good. One of the other things that you talked about in your blog was allowing distraction to become the preoccupation. And I think all of us as leaders know what distractions can do to us. Why are distractions, number one, so dangerous? And number two, we know they're there, and yet we don't do anything about them. Talk a little bit about distractions and how you see them becoming preoccupations and keeping the group from moving where they need to move.
Yeah. Honestly, if we get just real honest about human nature, I think distractions are a pressure relief system. And distraction often is something fun. Usually, most distractions are easier and maybe fun compared to doing the deep work.
That's right.
The deep work of thinking, that's an executive's primary job, is to think. And I remember coaching a young senior pastor about your number one job as a leader is to think. And so tell me when you think, when do you think during the week? And he goes, "Oh, I think all the time." I said, "No, you don't. Nobody does. Our brain is so powerful. We're on autopilot most of our time. You have to set aside."
That's right.
2 hours here and 2 hours here of think time. And so he goes, "Okay, I will. I'll set it aside." And he came back the next coaching call. And I said, "How'd you do?" He says, "Well, I did it. I set the time aside." And he goes, "But I sat down and I didn't know what to think about." It was awesome. And I said, "Okay, that's honest. I love it." A leader's number one thing he thinks about or she thinks about is how to solve a problem or what problem to solve. And so now there are obviously writing sermons and doing other things. There are things you think about. But the number one task of a leader is to figure out the problems, figure them out first, and figure out solutions. And so I think it's just easier to be distracted by something a little more fun to do in your work than it is to do the deep work of thinking and problem solving.
I had a great ESPN basketball analyst. He was a former college coach on the call, and his name is Jimmy Dykes. So Jimmy is probably the number one college basketball guy right now. And I asked him, I said, "Okay, you sit courtside. You've seen the best of the best of the best. What separates a good coach from a great coach?" And this was his comment. And I will hang my hat on it. And you just said the exact same thing. He said, every coach sees the problem. The great ones know how to fix it.
That's it.
They know how to fix it, and their teams know they know how to fix it. And he talked about Mike Krzyzewski. They were down by 20, and Krzyzewski called timeout, brought his team. There was like 2 minutes left in the half, and said, "I don't know what's happening. We're down by 20. If you can get us to halftime, if you can get me to halftime, we'll figure it out." And the team did it. They kept it where it was. They got to halftime, came back, won the game.
That's so
But he
good.
said that's what great coaches do, though. But if you don't have time to think, you aren't going to do the job. Why are distractions, why do they appeal to us? Not only are they easy, why do we feel like we're making movement, even with distractions sometimes? Why do we feel like we're getting the organization forward, even though we're just chasing a distraction?
I think we're from marketing and culture, we're prone to the new and the shiny, and we think new and shiny is better.
That's good.
And so something comes along, go, that's a good idea, or that's accomplished was great, or look at that guy has a blue website and our website is red, and so we want to chase all these shiny things rather than the consistency and the execution that's really needed. When we talk about an organization going from a smaller one to a larger one, once it gets larger, let's call it, Mike, the beginning stages of larger. They really they don't do dumb things. You can't be that large and just do, dumb things. I think that the real issue is more about consistency and execution. Once you have a good plan, I'll say this statement that I really, really, really believe is a B plan or a B plus strategy with solid execution and consistent execution is going to beat an A plan with sloppy execution every time.
Every time. That's good. That is so good. And this even goes in to the next mistake you talked about, a smart idea for a God-ordained idea. And I think distractions can lead us sometimes to smart ideas without really putting in the incubator and it becoming a God idea. What is the difference between, and you talk about it in the blog, a good idea, a smart idea, and a God idea? What's the biggest difference in those?
They are, and I'll add a little bit to that maybe, but a good idea is one that works. That's a good thing. Somebody had it, there's a problem, there's a solution, it's a good idea, it works. A smart idea carries layers and nuances of a solution that provide depth and progress and that actually leads to momentum. And that's a great thing. Smart ideas are a great thing. But there's something even better, and that's a God idea, a God-ordained idea. And Mike, as a pastor, I know you know what I'm talking about. You know when God speaks. You know when there's something to it. And the difference between, let's talk about vision for a second. There's a difference between heart vision and smart vision. So smart vision is great. It's just exactly what it sounds like it is. Well, that's a smart idea. Let's go do that for the vision. Heart vision is one where there's burden behind it. There's burden underneath it. And it takes that burden. My favorite passage for this is Nehemiah, in Nehemiah chapter 1. And what did he do when he see the wall was broken down and the people were discouraged? He wept.
That's right.
And there was that burden he had for the situation, the problem he needed to solve that kept him going when there was, opposition. And I think for any kind of company, if it's a business and there's a product or whatever it might be, when you really care about the problem in the world you're trying to solve. And for you and I, of course, it's God bringing redemption to those through Christ. But when you really care about the problem you're trying to solve, that will sustain you through all the opposition that you will see as you grow larger and reach more people.
And it's so good. And what I love about that is it's so transferable to all of the folks on this call today that are business leaders and government leaders and coaches that go, God put me where he put me for a reason bigger than me. Listen, that God-ordained idea, yes, it works in church. But I believe he put you there to have the exact same thing. And it's not easy. The good idea is quicker. You can get it in and get it out quicker. And a lot of times, and what I've learned, Dan, through the years, those God-ordained ideas really benefit me way less and benefit others way more.
Oh, that's good.
My good ideas always benefit me, of course. I mean, at the end of the day, that's what I like, is to be happy, healthy, wealthy, and wise. But sometimes those God ideas stretch us and they put us through the ringer a little bit and they get us in some lanes we don't want to be in. That was one of my favorite things about your blog, that article, because I think all of us can make that mistake. The longer you're in it, the less hard things you want to do.
Yeah. And that typically the good idea, the one we can check off our list quicker, it doesn't stretch the budget. It doesn't stretch leadership. It doesn't stretch anything. But the God idea, the one that really helps, the one that really makes a difference, it's going to cost more money. It's going to take more time. It's going to take more people. It's going to you have to lead bigger and larger always. So you look at that and you go, but it's the right thing.
It's the right thing. We were talking before we went on the call today about the season that we're in as a church. And I was on this call with a pastor out of Jacksonville, Florida, Joby Martin, and Joby said something and it just got all up in my business. And I believe it wasn't for our audience. I believe it was for me. He said, if your prayers don't intimidate you, they're an insult to God. And yeah, I really wished I hadn't heard that, because that really got me off center, because I like being comfortable. As I get older, I like risk way less now than I did when I was 28, because I'm getting to the end and I want to pull things in and keep them safe. One of the other mistakes you talked about was assuming that consistent execution always accompanies a good strategy. Talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, we talked about that just a second already, but we can add to it. Again, I really think that in many, 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 many organizations, certainly the churches I get to coach and so forth, they're really good people doing good things, but they kind of don't like the details. They don't like the playbook. They don't want to fool around with the follow-up and the basics and the fundamentals. They're just not executing the plan. That doesn't even sound spiritual. That doesn't even sound like something we're supposed to do, but it actually is.
That's right.
And so let's talk about getting up in our business for a second. Too many times we change the strategy rather than working harder to make the strategy work. And because it's just easier, so much easier to start a new one, even though it's wasted time and energy. And what I really believe about this, maybe more personal, is if you're bored with your strategy, find joy in and you don't go about trying to find joy in the new plan. Find it in new people who benefit from the plan. And because I admit it, I don't want to give the same talk over and over again. I don't want to do the same thing over and over again, but that's the wrong focus, I think. If I really care about the people I'm serving, I'm going to bring enthusiasm to this thing we're doing that they're experiencing for the very first time.
I love that.
And so we don't need that new plan. We just need to work the plan we have really well. Now, obviously, plans need to be refreshed and adapted and keep up with culture, but you know what I'm saying.
That's right. The final mistake you talked about, I think is probably the one I've struggled with the most out of this whole list, is tolerating behaviors and attitudes that break down a healthy culture. I think on this call we have people that are the D's. They love to walk into it and they don't mind dealing with it. And then you have your S's and your I's, disc people that are going, oh man, I don't want to hurt this person's feelings. I don't want to. I was on the phone yesterday with a school superintendent dealing with this exact issue he was having to deal with in his culture. Why do leaders that are so driven, why can they sometimes tolerate things that don't need to be a part of this organization? What would you say?
Well, the real candid answer is sometimes they just don't want to fool with it. They don't want to mess with it. To be a little bit kinder, sometimes we just move too fast. We're just moving too fast. We don't slow down. We just want to go on to the next and try to solve the biggest pressure that's in our face in the moment rather than solving the pressure that's not in our face, but it's the one that's going to get us.
That's good.
And so the problems that are like the loudest one, the loudest person, the thing in your face, the budget that we didn't make or whatever is happening, that's the one you lean toward, where some of the basics like your staff culture, they don't scream as loud until it's broken. And now it's not too late, but it's going to be much more difficult to repair it. I liken it to, with developing a culture and staff values and keeping those things moving forward in the right and a healthy way. It's a little bit like the consistent behavior of putting the good stuff in the water, which isn't just putting a list of these are our staff values. You have to consistently make those investments to keep the staff together and keep the morale high and keep the thinking similar. Like getting the good stuff in the water takes a lot of work because you have to be consistent. But then sometimes you get some the bad stuff in the water. Yep. And getting that out, getting the toxin, getting the bad stuff out of the water is really complex. And that can take a lot of time. And leaders just don't want to fool around with it because it takes too much time. Honestly, you mentioned, my career as a number two. I've loved doing that. I love to be in the thick of it, be in the glue of the organization, not the star. I've never been the star. I've always been the glue. And it's important to have the star or the stars. It's important to have the star because someone's got to break through. Someone's got to break through the walls. But if you don't have somebody on the team that keeps the thing glued together while you're going through the walls,
That's right. You're exactly right.
And so it's a team effort, and someone has to go in and deal with the conflict. Somebody has to establish staff values. And then of course the thing that's the ace for all organizations is, are you developing the team? Are you pouring into them as leaders? Are you shepherding them? Are you caring for them? Are you checking on their family? Are you investing in the team? Do you want more for them than from them? That's what really keeps a culture together, rather than just pressing forward for the bottom line and not treating people well. And then you lose the culture. And when you lose the culture of your team, you're going to start losing progress toward your vision.
You know, Dan, number one, you are just a fountain of wisdom. And I love that you don't keep it to yourself. That's what I love about your blog. You take all these thoughts that you've accumulated all these years, and how long have you been blogging now?
Oh my gosh, since blogging started. I mean, that's a good question. I've been blogging since before blogging. I used to do, back in the old Enjoy days, you'll love this.
Yeah.
Tapes, you young listeners, look it up on Wikipedia. Don't you have a lot of cassette taping? But I did a paper. The Pastor's Coach started as a paper newsletter. Can you believe that? Something mailed out? Can you believe that? Anyway, I probably maintain 400 or 500 blog posts at any given time on my website, and I'm consistently taking a year or two down. So I think from 2012 to 2015 to 2016, all of those are gone.
Wow.
So 400 to 500 are from then till now. So I'm always dumping the older ones, putting in newer ones, and I love it.
And we're going to have a link to that in the show notes, because that is a way to get consistent wisdom and to go, man, and it's so applicable. Leadership's leadership. That's the one thing I've learned, sort of living in a lot of different lanes. It's all the same. It's all the same, different context, but all the same. If you were, final question today, you were sitting down and having a cup of coffee with a leader, and they are struggling with one of these, which we all struggle with one of these, what encouragement would you give them?
I think the first encouragement I would give them is that you're doing a really good thing by being honest about a struggle. I think if you will start with identifying the issue you need to work on, identifying the one where you need a breakthrough, you need to focus on, don't worry about all 6. You probably don't need to worry about all 6. Pick one, get honest about it, bring some key people around you, and have an honest conversation. So I guess that's 2 steps, Mike. One is do your best to identify the one that you need to work on, and then get some wisdom in the room and have an honest conversation about what are we going to do. If you want to go for extra credit, here's another one. Talk about how you got there. Because if you can learn how you got there, how did we let this happen, you might have some insight as to how to prevent it from happening in the future.
So much good content. Dan just breaks things down in such simple ways. And I knew even when we were prepping for that podcast, Dan's like, man, as I look back on my journey, there were just some things I wish I would have known. Aren't you glad he took those things and shared them with us? I tell you this, Dan's one of those people, every time I'm with him, I just leave better. That's the word. I just always leave better. No matter if it's a phone call, whether it's a Zoom meeting, or whether we were able to break bread with each other somewhere, Dan Reiland just leaves you better. Thank you, Dan, for sharing with us, because I know we're all better for it. Well, if this episode has added value to you and your leadership journey, would you leave a rating and review on iTunes or Spotify or wherever you listen, YouTube, and just invite others to be a part. You can share it on your social platforms, but the best way is to subscribe. That way you never miss an episode, because it's such an honor you're here. Well, our next episode, I get to introduce you to a friend. You may not know her. Her name is Julie Schaffner. She has helped build a company called Voices to Connect that is making waves in the speakers industry and getting collaborators and people all partnered together. And man, I'm telling you, Julie is a special lady and a special leader who's been a massive help to this podcast. Well, thank you so much for listening in today. Thanks for being a part of the Linch with a Leader journey, because, man, it just means the world that you took time to spend time with us. Now, here's our challenge. Go out and love God. Go out and love people. And let's go out and live sent in the spaces and places that God put us. And let's make a difference for Him. Have a great day, everybody.
Thank you for listening to the Linch with a Leader podcast with your host, Mike Linch. If you enjoyed this episode, you can help more people hear it by subscribing and leaving a review wherever you may be listening. For full episode notes and more spiritual leadership resources, visit MikeLynch.com.